big news today, of course, the U.S. takes out Iran's head terrorist, Qasem Soleimani. Now, I certainly don't purport to be an authority or expert in the realm of foreign policy, but I don't think you need to be an expert to come to some very basic conclusions about things. And I base those conclusions on the facts that are generally agreed upon by all reasonable people, it seems. And those facts are: Soleimani was an evil, murderous man. He was responsible for the deaths of hundreds of U.S. military members and civilians as well. He had planned attacks on American soil in the past, including one in D.C. that was foiled, fortunately, before it happened. He was behind recent attacks against Americans in Iraq, including the attack on our embassy a few days ago. He was an ongoing threat to American lives and the lives of many others. Many people of other nationalities, including Iranians, by the way. Now, none of that is disputed from what I've seen. The Pentagon says that Soleimani was also planning an imminent attack of some kind against Americans. Now, you could say that you don't believe that, and you don't trust the Pentagon, but you don't need to believe it. We don't even need that. You don't need to take the Pentagon's word for it when it comes to the other points that I just listed. And I think that tells us everything we need to know in terms of, was this attack morally justified? The thing that finally prompted the U.S. to respond were the recent attacks, especially at the embassy. We knew where Soleimani was. We had his location. Trump ordered the attack, took him out. Based on all of that, I say it's morally justified. Now, does it make strategic sense? From my non-expert perspective, it seems to make a lot of strategic sense. Yes, all of these people, liberals and Democrats mostly, and we'll talk about them more in a minute, but these people worrying about escalation or that this might constitute an act of war and so on. Well, an attack on our embassy is an escalation. It is an act of war. The only question is whether we will show a willingness to respond swiftly and harshly to that sort of provocation or not. That's the question. An unwillingness to respond, a policy of appeasement, it seems to me, like the policy that Obama had initiated, which included sending pallets of cash to Iran. That kind of policy obviously does not de-escalate or prevent future attacks, and we could clearly see that, because if it did, then we wouldn't be having this conversation right now. Obama appeased for 8 years. Did Iran de-escalate? Did they back off? Did they play nice? Did it result in peace and harmony in the Middle East? No, obviously not. If you don't show a willingness to protect yourself, to defend yourself, to respond in kind, if you don't show that kind of willingness, then you embolden your enemies and you send the message that they can do whatever they want. And obviously that's not the message we want to send. Look, I'm not in favor of regime change wars. I don't want to be the world police. I've basically been a non-interventionist. But taking out a monstrous scumbag who's been killing Americans for decades and staged an attack on our embassy only a few days ago is neither of those things. That's not being world police, and that's not a regime change war. It's appropriate, it's just, it's necessary, I would argue. It's obviously reckless, to be someone who is itching for war all the time, always wanting to intervene, always wanting to send troops over everywhere and start wars everywhere. And there are people like that. I think there are fewer people like that today than there were, say, 20 years ago, but there are people out there like that. The so-called neocons and so forth. But the other extreme end is this anti-war absolutism that you also find out there. In fact, the very notion of being anti-war is really a silly and unserious position, because there are times when military action is necessary. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and share it with all your friends.